Yes, so my work package is related to the biomarker data that are in the closer studies. And so one of the things I tend to do is kind of think about how biomarker data are being collected across the different closer studies and how that might impact on what we've been doing in terms of looking at some of the more substantive questions that might be important or that we think about when we're thinking about the social to biological interface. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of the background on why the way you collect, how collecting influences the measures that you end up with. And then we actually did an experiment, a sort of an experiment in Whitehall II, where we looked at the influence of collection conditions on biomarker levels, and then really talk about the impact of some of these things on the sort of substantive questions we might want to ask with our data sets. So there is a whole literature on collecting bloods and creating biobanks, and there is a sort of there is an ideal sample collection method. So the ideal sample collection method that you would use when you want to collect a blood sample is you bring someone into a clinic, sit them down, relax them for a little while, have a nurse, she would do a venipuncture, which is put a little needle in, collect your blood sample, process the sample straight away, which means spin it down, take off the serum or the plasma, and then measure whatever it is that you're interested in measuring. So that's kind of an idealized way of doing these data collections, but very rarely is that how it's done. That is not usually how it's done. You usually in a clinical setting, what you would do, you are in a hospital or something, you have your patient, you would collect your blood sample, you might collect blood samples from a few people, you kind of collate a few blood samples, keep them somewhere, then send them off to the lab around the corner. They might wait until they've got enough samples to measure the thing that they want to, and then or process the sample and then freeze it, and then much later when they've got a few samples, measure the thing that they want to measure. So even in a kind of a setting where you've brought someone in, these sort of things, right, does that work? That might not happen. In the sorts of studies that we have, none of that actually happened, really. Right? So in our typical sample collections, we can bring people into a clinic. Some studies do bring people into a clinic. Usually we don't do that because we might be interested in we don't want to bias our sample, and so bringing people into a clinic might do that. So we use different methods. We might go into a person's home and then use a nurse to collect the sample there and then send the sample in the post. That's actually the usual way that we do this in a lot of the studies that we work with. So we go into the home, we delay the sample processing, we delay the storage, we do lots and lots of things that are not optimal. And so that might have or might not have some impact on what we're trying to do. So if you look at the closer data sets, we have, in fact, that they're kind of split in this a little bit by kind of MRC studies. So Alspach, NSHD, Hertfordshire, bring people into, have brought people into a clinic and take the samples that way. But a lot of the data sets you might come across, a lot of the data sets that we have here in CLS have used a different method. So NCDS, we went into the participant's home, a nurse collected the blood sample, she sent it in the post to the lab processed it and measured a few things and then aliquoted the sample, which means created little packets of sample almost, and then stored those. NSHD is quite interesting in that they did both. When the participants were aged 53, they saw people at home. When the participants were aged 60 to 64, I've written 63, sorry, they were seen in the clinic. I'm going to talk to you today about Whitehall II, where we brought people into a clinic, and then here, as I said, the data sets that you might find in the archive, most of the data sets that you find in the archive, Understanding Society, Health Survey for England, English Longitudinal Study of Aging, use this method where we went into the participant's home and collected blood samples and sent them in the post. So does it matter? The things that kind of can vary, that can influence, on top of that clinic versus home issues, are that we might want to think about when we're thinking about how we're collecting sample, is that some of our biomarkers that we measure sort of vary by the time of the day. There's some suggestion that the method that you use to collect the blood sample influence the measure. So there's some suggestion, for example, that if you don't collect like this, where you put in a needle and collect the blood, but actually put in something called a butterfly and leave that there for reasonably long periods of time, that influences the actual measure that you get on some of the biomarkers that you might be interested in. And then there are kind of broader issues that we might want to worry about, such as when in the time of the year you've taken your biomarker levels. If you're measuring something that is related to, say, infection or in your immune function, you might get different values in the winter than you do in the summer. So there's lots and lots of collection conditions that might be important for some of the biomarkers that you're looking at. So, as I said, there's actually quite a reasonable literature on biobanking, which I've just taken sort of the guidance from a paper that a lot of people cite when they talk about the sorts of pre-analytic markers that might influence your measure. So here, pre-analytic markers are not things like who said yes to giving a blood sample. They're things like did you centrifuge the blood sample that you collected straight away, and that kind of thing. So you have these sort of pre-analytic conditions like centrifugation. How long did you wait before collecting the sample and centrifuging it, which means spinning it down and taking the sample off? Do centrifugation conditions matter? So in terms of the practice and guidance, it's very technical and very kind of small about the sample that's being collected. And then these sort of post-centrifugation conditions like delaying between collecting and processing. Did you keep your sample cold while you were waiting? So there's lots of that sort of guidance there. And in this paper, which is a protocol on how to investigate that sort of guidance, you have these sort of suggestions of, say, if you're really interested in understanding the delay between collection and processing, you can take 7 samples and you can delay you can collect it and then split them so that half of them are processed straight away and another half are processed an hour later. The sorts of ends that you're talking about are something like that. So when Biobank did a pre-pilot study, they had an N of 40 participants. That was considered really large in this literature. And what Biobank did was have this pre-pilot where there's this large validation study, and what they conclude, and they measured lots and lots of different analytes, and they looked at all of these things, and what they decided was that to have to reduce measurement error, what people should do is actually almost circumvent all of that and to try and do the idealist thing as possible. Bring people into a clinic, and that would be the best way to get the best sample. So for us, that's a bit of a problem, because if we were going to organise our studies now, we might want to do it that way. But in lots of ways, it's too late. What we are interested in is how did we collect, and does that actually affect the quality of the sample that we've got? So while it might be that really we should be bringing lots of people in, using a kind of a broader framework, if we're interested in, say, the impact of the social environment on any of our markers, if bringing people into a clinic means that you're reducing that social variation, perhaps that's not the right thing to do for us. So we kind of have to work backwards and say, well, what did we do, and how did the way that we collect our sample, even though it's not ideal, can it influence the sorts of things that we're really trying to look at? So as I said, ALSPAC and NSHD and the Hertfordshire cohort study in Closer have brought people into clinic and done various other things. And then we've got these kind of home visits from Understanding Society, Southampton's Women's Study, NCDS and NSHD at age 53. So has anybody actually looked at the way that we collect our sample and the impact of it on our biomarkers? And luckily, in Whitehall II, we actually did do that. Almost as a matter of course, in the Whitehall II study, it started out as a study where we brought people into a clinic. Participants are in their 40s, who were interested in kind of social variation in lots and lots of different biomarkers. But as the participants aged, it became clear it was going to become more and more difficult to bring people into a clinic. Participants were retiring, they were moving away from London. There was an attempt, we had at phase 5 of the study, when the participants were on average 55, we had a little bus that went around the country, so we're bringing people into a clinic in a little bus, but we decided that wasn't going to work so well when half of the participants had retired by phase 7 of the study, so we were going to have to use a different method. And so what happened from phase 7 of the study is that participants were offered a visit to the clinic or offered a home visit. And so that meant we were going to have to, because of the mixture, we were going to have to understand what was happening in the clinic or in the home. And so we did a little experiment. So you methodologists in the room, when the idea that our experiments are small to your ears, and but they're actually quite large to a different set of ears. So we've got we did an experiment where we asked a set of people to come back, or could we see them again in the home. So what we did, we routinely, in every wave of Whitehall II, what we do is we ask a set of people that if they'll come back to the clinic, we just repeat them. So they come, and then we say to ask about 5% of the participants, can you come back? And we just do everything again, and then so that gives us a repeat measure. What we did with people was we said to them, can you come back? If you say yes to that, can we do that in your home? So we have one set of people where we've had them in the clinic, and then we asked them if we could see them in their home. And then we saw, and then there was a set of people who had been invited to a clinic but didn't come, so they wanted to be seen at home. And so we saw them at home, and then we asked some of them if we could see them again in the home. So here we've got sort of 352 people that we saw twice in the clinic, nearly 200 people that we saw where they were initially seen in the clinic but then at home. We didn't do, and then it's 100 people that we saw in the home twice. We didn't do a proper experiment in that we didn't do the reverse. So we didn't say to people who wanted to be seen at home in the first place, can you come into the clinic? Because there's a reason they didn't want to come into the clinic when they were initially invited. All invitations were always to the clinic first. So it's a sort of quasi-experiment. It's not an experiment in the sense of doing everything exactly the same. We did offer it. It's quite selected in the sense of only a certain set of people will say yes to being seen twice. So there are kind of issues in the sense of it being a proper experiment. I'll talk about that in a second. So here are our participants. In total, in the phase 7 sample, what we had was we had just over 5,500 people who eventually were seen in the clinic, and then 700 people who were seen in the home. So, as you would imagine, when you're doing a repeat, a clinic repeat, the idea of it is really to get an idea, is to understand, well, you want everything to be the same. You're just collecting the same thing, it's the same participants, and that's what you see. So here, these are just some of the biomarkers that we're looking at. This is good cholesterol, this is a marker of inflammation, HDL, cholesterol, so they're not varying. This is called C-reactive protein. This is fibrinogen's a biomarker that's associated with inflammation and kind of how sticky your blood is. Triglycerides are fats in your body. Hemoglobin, you would get that measured if you were trying to understand whether you're anemic or not, and glucose is a sort of measure of diabetes. So as you would expect, they're not different. You get the same sort of values if people are seeing once and then again 2 or 3 weeks later, and that's good. That's what you would hope. What we found was that there were small differences in participants who were repeated at home. So HDL, cholesterol, CRP, they're pretty much the same value. We saw this difference in fibrinogen in people who were seen at home. And so I'm going to admit to something here. So it was kind of me that organised this experiment in phase 7 of Whitehall II. And what we did when we ran the analyses initially to say there wasn't a difference at home was just look at the kind of correlations. We didn't really look at mean values. And so it was quite interesting to go back to these data and look at them again and see this difference in fibrinogen, because I didn't know it was there. And we see this slight difference in triglyceride levels with no differences in these other biomarkers. So generally there isn't too much difference in these biomarkers that we measured at phase 7.
Well, I just want to check, what's the time gap between the clinic and the home?
So it was sort of 2 or 3 weeks. It wasn't a long time gap. It could have been up to 6 weeks, so it's possible you went from...
Sorry, just to clarify, when you said mean values, that p-value is based on paired t-test of the difference between individual results.
Speak on your previous comment on the correlations. I mean, yes, there is a mean difference there, right? Of fibrinogen measured at the clinic at home, but if the correlation is very high, the ranking is preserved. That wouldn't bias any other analysis, right?
Yeah, no, I'm going to talk about that.
So is it preserved?
I'm going to talk about that in a second. That's fine. That's exactly right. So I just hadn't. I was so surprised to see it, because we did just do that kind of ranking almost, and I'll show you some data in a second which sort of suggested it didn't make a difference, which is good. And then obviously again with the home, there isn't really too much going on, which is great. We did it all again at phase 7, and in phase 7 I was less involved in the blood sample collection, and what was decided at phase 7 is that we would repeat this clinic home experiment again. Participants are now a little bit older, they're 5 years older than they were, and we were expecting more and more people to start wanting a home visit, and so but it was decided that a home repeat wasn't necessary, so we didn't do that. We just did the clinic repeat, because that's what we always do, and then this clinic home repeat for a small set of people. And again, you know, this is I think if I was presenting this to clinicians, say, these numbers would be quite large, but if you're going to do all of this properly, perhaps it isn't, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we measured quite a new set of markers. These are all new to Whitehall II. So again, this is total cholesterol, just an example. Total cholesterol, good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, triglycerides. Hemoglobin A1C is a new measure of diabetes. These are kind of new to Whitehall II. So these are kidney function measures, EGFR, and these are sort of, again, related to sort of kidney function. And if you're looking at the clinic, you've got a nice, they're doing what they're supposed to do, they're not supposed to vary too much, and they don't. What we found, though, was that some of these newer biomarkers looked quite different in these same people at home, and that's quite interesting. And so here we've got EGFR, which is a measure of kidney function. It's much lower when it was measured at home than in the participants in the clinic, and all of these are quite different. But again, the issue is, does it matter, right? So let's have a look. The other thing that we noticed was that, before I go on to does it matter, the other thing that we noticed was that, although I call this an experiment at the beginning, in fact, the site of collection, as it were, is not the only thing that's different about the collection, even though it's the same people. So lots of things are varying between in this experiment. The time of day is varying in this experiment. In Whitehall II, the participants, when they came to the clinic, were seen sort of in the morning between 8 a.m. and the last appointments were early afternoon. Whereas, because we were using we're going into people's homes, a nurse is going into their homes when they're doing the home visit, they were seen at slightly later times of day, even though it's the same person. The participant actually seen at a different time of day. Participants tended to have their homes at a slightly different temperature to the clinic. The nurses used different arms for sample collection in the home than in the clinic. Obviously, in the home, you are delaying, the bloods are not processed straight away, they always were in the clinic. They were seen, so here you can see that we're kind of, the whole clinic is taken all across the whole of the year, but we invited people only at certain times of the year, so we ended up having these sort of seasonal differences between what was home and what was clinic, and then sometimes people were seen at weekends at home, whereas they were always seen at weekdays in the clinic, and then clinic was over 18 months, whereas most of the home visits, because of the way that people were invited, meant that they were kind of concentrated in a particular year. So those aren't the only issues, and that might be the reason that you're actually seeing some of these differences, and we need to have a little bit of a look at that. We haven't quite got there yet. So this is just a little picture of some of the things that we have started looking at. So what we've got here is time of day, and in the clinic and in the home. It looks like the same picture. I might have just picked something up. But actually, time of day isn't explaining the difference between home and clinic in the biomarkers that are different. And this is just the mean in the clinic, and this is the kind of the means as you delay sample processing. So that's not explaining the difference between this particular biomarker and the difference between home and clinic there. So we just need to do a bit more work on what the other things are that might be explaining this difference. So I guess, so there's a bit of work still left to do there. What it's George's question is really kind of the important one. Does it matter that they're different in the clinic or in the home? And so what we did was just have a look to see if if they matter in the way that we know things like age and sex and weight and diabetes and sort of medication and smoking matter for these biomarkers. So if we do that, what we find is that that they don't really they're not really that important in comparison to participant individual characteristics. So if you look at these markers, these sorts of things that we regularly look at when we're trying to understand our biomarkers, in fact they don't really matter on top of those very much at all. So whereas the kind of the findings from a study like Biobank might be that, you know, you should really do everything properly and it's really important that you bring people in and you treat your sample with love and care. And that's true if you're particularly interested in something that has a really small effect, like say a genetic marker, it might matter then. But here we're finding that generally these collection factors, they don't really do very much work in terms of explaining variation in an analyte. So these are just almost like comparing these sort of collection conditions versus some of the other things that we know influence our biomarker. So they're not really having big effects. I mean, the biggest effect here for hemoglobin is having been reported to be diabetic. And for EGFR, there you can see that screening site does seem to have almost like the biggest effect. But again, what we're interested in is, do some of the questions that we're wanting to ask ourselves, are they influenced by that? And I'll talk about that in a second. But these effects are not big compared to some of the other things that you might see when you're looking at some of these biomarkers. And these are the ones that we saw the biggest home clinic effect on. So you can see that, and then what we have found is that this biomarker here, urea, seems to be particularly affected by having by the delay in processing. And then there's this marker here, phosphate, which was measured, which is related to kidney function. So, the other thing that we noticed that in Whitehall II is that there is a potential for some of this to matter, because if you look in the main data set, there is actually a social difference in who actually asked for a home visit. So here you've got the proportion of people who had a home visit by employment grade. So in Whitehall II, the main social position measure is civil service employment grade. So one is kind of professional, the most advantaged employment grades, and 6 are sort of messengers and various. So you're kind of going down civil service employment grade like that. And when we looked at it, what we found was that we seem to have quite a lot of women in our kind of lower employment grades who are asking for a home visit. And in both phase 7 and phase 9, you see this kind of social gradient in who's asking for a home visit. So it is something that you might want to think about when you're doing your analysis, actually, to adjust for whether people were seen in the clinic or at home. And that isn't always done in the analyses. But what we found is that actually, if you look at people who are seen in the clinic and you look at people who are seen at home, you really kind of see the same pattern with last known employment grade, but it's just the levels are different. So, in our substantive question, if we're interested in social differences in these biomarkers, it doesn't matter. Here you've got, might find different ways of drawing these out, but here these are significant, although they don't look very big. So you can see that as you go down the employment grade, you've got slightly higher levels there and slightly lower levels there. But in fact, there's no difference in terms of the pattern by whether you're seen at home or whether you're seen in the clinic. It's just this one biomarker, urea, that there isn't a social gradient in it in either home or these are clinic, these are home. But the patterns are actually the same, so it doesn't matter for our biomarkers of interest. I mean, these are, in absolute terms, these are quite different, but they look the same. So in terms of what we might be interested in, I think it doesn't matter but you should take care of them in your analysis. You should think about whether you're kind of seeing a slightly noisier picture than you would do normally. So what we thought we would do is actually check some of this in a data set that's quite different from the Whitehall II study. So we've had a quick look at some of these biomarkers that we've also collected in Understanding Society. So in Understanding Society, we didn't see anybody in a clinic. Everybody was seen at home. And everything was different in Understanding Society. We saw people at home. We took the blood. The bloods were collected by nurses. They were sent in the post. They were processed by the lab. They were stored then. We didn't measure anything we didn't measure anything for possibly a year or two from those stored aliquots. So everything's different in Understanding Society compared to the Whitehall II study. And the Whitehall II study has a wider population. It's representative of the country. Whitehall II participants are civil servants who lived in London. And there was specific age. We've got a wide age range in Understanding Society, which goes from 16 to 102. So we could check. So we have slightly different kind of collection problems in Understanding Society. But here, given that we think that we saw kidney biomarkers and liver biomarkers to be particularly problematic, we thought we'd kind of check those in where we could in Understanding Society. So so which biomarkers look as though they might have some difficulties in Whitehall II, where we had a look at triglycerides. And again, it's these participant characteristics that kind of matter for the measures. These other markers, so the time of day, the delay between collecting and processing the sample, when the sample was collected. So here we've included something called year, which is actually participants were seen at waves 2 and waves 3 in Understanding Society, but they're actually quite different people. They should look a little bit different from each other. Arm and temperature and all of those things, and the system that the nurse used to collect bloods, because it wasn't always the same. It's really kind of the sex of the respondent that's kind of having the biggest effect. All of these are sort of small, well, they're not effects, there's not really a lot going on. Maybe the time of day matters for Understanding Society. So fibrinogen looked a little bit problematic before, and again, we see that the sorts of things that I'm talking about now, collection characteristics, don't really influence fibrinogen. It's the participants' own kind of characteristics that are related to fibrinogen levels. And it's sort of the same picture for all of the biomarkers that look like they might be slightly problematic in Whitehall II. There's urea, which is the one that looks like it's having the most influenced by delay. We saw that in Whitehall II, we saw that in Understanding Society, and I think I would argue that people, if they're going to go and have a nurse come out to the home and collect blood, people shouldn't measure urea because it doesn't seem to be stable to this method of collection. Again, the question is, does it matter for the sort of the substantive question that we might be interested in asking ourselves? So we saw this sort of social variation, civil service variation in this hemoglobin, hemoglobin, and you see a sort of, so Whitehall II participants are going to be about here in this. This is NSSEC, I think, in Understanding Society. So you've got people who are unemployed and lots of other things that are not represented in Whitehall II. Whitehall II is an occupational cohort. And so here you've got this social variation there, and it's really reflecting that bit of the curve there, I think. It's the same. Most of the biomarkers that were socially patterned in Whitehall II are similarly socially patterned in Understanding Society. It doesn't, given the wide difference in how the biomarkers are collected, really we don't see that it really impacts on the kind of question, the question that we're asking. I think if we were going to do this properly, we would actually do this sort of experimental work in appropriately powered studies. I don't think that it generally is done in appropriately powered studies. There's kind of a disciplinary difference in terms of how we approach these sorts of experiments. And so where I come from a background where an N of 10 would have been okay, I've seen people hold their hands up in horror at Lisa's shaking her head at me.
It's not a matter of power in this case. I think your results are convincing, but it's not a matter of power. That's how we respond. I mean, if someone says anything about power, it's not power.
So we need to do a bit more work on the kind of why those home visit, those repeats from clinic to home did vary for those particular biomarkers that I'm showing you, because it could be to do with some of those other collection factors that we didn't kind of properly experiment or take into account. And then these factors here, which are sort of time of day and all those, they do matter for some of the biomarkers, and you should take them into account in your analyses. And you should check them. You should always check these things when you're coming to a data set and you don't know the biomarker very well. You should always check these variables, but in lots of ways these would have to vary by your exposure of interest for them to really influence your outcome, and they generally don't. They might do, it's possible. For example, if you're looking at aging, it's possible that some of these things could vary. In Understanding Society, we think we tend to see working age people in the evening versus retired people in the day. And so if you were interested in retirement, then you would think about that and make sure that you dealt with it in your analysis. So I think that's really just a repeat of what I've said before, but those are the kind of main findings from Understanding Society. The collection factors really made a limited contribution to the biomarkers' variability, but you know they are associated, so you should think about them. I think that's what my guidance, as it were, in terms of doing these analyses, is that you don't know what these, but often don't know what these biomarkers are, and that you should actually check for all of these things. I think there are other things that are more important that the biobanking literature or people don't think about. So one of the things I haven't talked about here that's really, really important is that different people say yes to a nurse visit and it's likely that different people will come to a clinic. And so those kind of more upstream things that are not about the actual collection itself are things that we should think about and are probably going to influence the sorts of analyses that we do more than these sort of factors. So I think there is a little bit of work to do more on a sort of technical level in terms and provide and sort of what we need to do in Closer and in Understanding Society is provide guidance or tell you which of these biomarkers, which of these factors actually are related to these biomarkers. So in our glossary, we tell you that CRP values change throughout the day and that we need to go through all of the Closer biomarkers available in Closer and do that, and that's what we're doing. We're currently creating a catalogue for you all so that you can see how which of these things matter for which of the biomarkers that are available in the data set. And so I think I'm going to stop. And I just want to say, in the Whitehall II study, we collected the data, so it was a team within within epidemiology that do the actual data collection, bring people into the clinic. We ran the clinic. Bev Mill runs the clinic, and Stephanie Smith rings everybody up, really. So there's a whole team over in epidemiology that do that collection in Whitehall too. And then the Understanding Society team uses NatCen and TNS to do their data collection. So, questions?
Lovely, thank you very much.